This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you probably know, I did not do a show yesterday because it was a holiday, but I'm happy to be back with you today. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they will show up here in my chat room. And we can talk directly. I have just gotten back from the Corellian Regional Lustration in Buffalo, New York, and that was a wonderful weekend. If you follow my social media, you'll have seen lots of photos and videos. Hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. And it was quite a busy weekend, many interesting things. We'll be having a regional lustration here in the Danville area at the end of September. And I'll be bringing you photos and videos from that as well. Hello to two neurons in the chat room. It's good to see you. And yes, it was a lovely weekend. Hello to Janet Winston. It's good to see everyone. And the last 2 days of last week, I did best of vlogs because I was in transit. And I hope that you enjoyed those. But of course, I missed getting to talk to you. And I do enjoy this time that we spend together each day. And I hope that you do too. And today, my stated subject is persistence. And, I went back and forth over exactly how I was going to describe today's subject because there's more than one thing in it, but persistence was the original inspiration, and I have stuck with that. And of course, Midday with Reverend Don is an example of persistence. And hello to Eric in the chat room. It's good to see you, Eric. My Monday night chat room that I do and have done since 1998 is an example of persistence. And what do I mean by persistence, and what is its relevance to you? And when we talk about leadership, um, when we talk about things like witch wars and the wider cultural wars, it's actually extraordinarily relevant to anyone who might be the subject of a witch war or a cultural war or even just personal conflict. And there's a famous saying that 90% of success is just showing up. And that, you could also be, at least in some cases, rephrased as 90% of success is persistence, continuing to do, continuing to be. And a lot of times, the thing that is going to determine your survival, your success, is going to be whether you persist. There's a famous political example some years ago where Mitch McConnell was trying to silence Elizabeth Warren and could not do so, and ultimately said, and still she persisted. Well, yes, she did. And making no particular comment on what was being discussed, in part because I don't exactly remember it, but the fact that she persisted in many ways was a very effective tool on her part. And for a while, that phrase became extremely prominent. And it should be. Persistence is half the battle, if not more. When we talk about things like witch wars, there are so many other things involved in it. But ultimately, the goal of most witch wars is to convince the person it's being waged against, or the group it's being waged against, to stop, to fade, to walk away. And there's usually no way to force this. It's usually over relatively irrelevant things. And so emotional violence is usually the tool. But if you're persistent and outweigh it often will simply tire itself out. To some extent, I think this is Um, Certainly not the case with the wider cultural wars, but some of the battles. To persist and continue is in many ways the winning strategy. To not allow yourself to be cowed, to not allow yourself to be forced out, is in many ways what will make the difference in your survival and your prosperity. I have talked several times about how back in the 90s, there were, well, 90s, early 2000s, there was like a total of 17 witch wars that we found ourselves the subject of. And yet, here we sit now. And one of the reasons was that we persisted through all of it. We did not allow it to overcome us, to discourage us, to cause us to walk away. We continued doing what we do. One of the reasons that overall I feel pretty successful in the things I do is I don't stop. I just keep doing what I consider to be that next right thing. And I mentioned my chat room. I've been doing it since 1998. And it is still one of the right things for me to do. And so I continue to do it. The fact that I've continued doing it all that time is an example of being a grinder. I keep grinding on the things that I do. I keep writing books, I keep talking, I keep working with people. And, every now and then there's someone who doesn't like me, someone who wants to um, attack me, but it doesn't stop me. I just keep going. And persistence, I think, is very often the thing that is going to be the most successful thing you can do. Now, that doesn't mean that you should persist in something that's not working. Um, and I'll say again what I was saying the other day, you want to love your message, not your platform. So if I found, um, well, as I did, if I found the place where I started that very old chat room, which to the best of my knowledge is the longest ongoing pagan chat room, if I found that original platform was no longer the ideal platform, I would change it. The original platform was about.com. I changed it long ago. Um, I, for many years, held the chat in the Witch School chat room. And it was at one time a perfectly ordinary chat room where you just type things in. Later, it became a 3D chat room, which was a nightmare, but we tried it. Um, Today, I do it on Patreon, and we do it by video. And we all get together in our little Brady Bunch boxes, and we have a lovely chat. So it's changed drastically in the years since 1998, but it has continued. And when it comes to making a positive change in the world, you have to persist in trying to make that change. If you give up, whatever it is you wanted to do won't happen. And many times I've come to that position, including to some extent today, because I looked at this and said, I could just put up another best of today. I've been busy all weekend. Got home at 3 o'clock this morning. It would be nice to rest today. But I looked at it and said, no, I should do midday as I normally do. I would love to talk to people. And, they've already had several best ofs. It's time to have a new one. Um, but, it takes a certain amount of effort, and you have to be willing to do that. And Mary says, lol, Brady Bunch boxes. Yes. Um, I've actually heard that format described as Brady Bunch boxes. Um, and it's kind of just, I mean, for at least for a person of my generation, it fits very well. But again, in the decision, do I do a live show today or do I do a best of? Um, I thought the most productive thing was to come on and to talk. And plus, I had inspiration for what I wanted to say. Um, And it was the very fact of considering, am I going to do this, that was the inspiration. Um, Continuing, persisting, doing that next thing is what you must be prepared to do, above and beyond all the other things I talk about in terms of leadership. The willingness to continue to serve the world and your community, even when it's not always easy, is the number one thing. I will tell you that during those many witch wars, there were times when um, part of me would have loved to have walked away and said, screw all this. But it was not the right thing to do for the things that mattered in my life, the things I wanted to see happen. It was something that had to be dealt with. And, there were times when doing that next video, that next chat room, that next story was just a lot of work, but it had to be done. And to not do it risk all those things I want to see happen in the world. It risks their ability to come into being. Now, I'm not a believer in the idea that only one person can do any given thing. I believe that had I not been here to do certain things I've done, someone else would probably have done them. However, I do know that sometimes only um, only one person can do a certain thing a certain way, and um, I still feel that I need to keep my voice active and out in the world. Now, Eric says another great word for leaders is consistency, which is part of what I'm talking about. Yes, you want to continue working, you want to continue to do what you do, you want to be consistent, and you want to be relevant. And we spoke about relevance in a different program. And I do want to emphasize that when I say persistence is very important, you must also make sure your persistence is on relevant things. Persisting in irrelevance is not going to help anything. Um, you must be open to change, you must be open to development, but you also have to be open to the work of keeping it going. And it is work. And if you're looking for a position of leadership, whether we're talking about the wider community, the pagan community, or just your own life, there's a lot of work involved. There's always going to be a lot of work involved. And you have to be willing to do it. There are lots of rewards for that, including knowing that what needs done, as you have seen it, is getting done. But persistence is very important as you are moving forward. And now we're halfway through our hour, and so I want to take a moment for a word from our sponsor. And I'm back. And thank you, sponsor. And our sponsor is Equinox Learning Center. And if you would like to join our sponsors, feel free to contact myself or Reverend Mary Hawk about sponsorship opportunities. Because, the things we do have expenses. And doing all of this video does come with a certain cost. And sponsors greatly help to defray that cost. And that's another aspect of consistency, perseverance, etc. And that is that there are often always really costs involved. Sometimes the cost is just your time and your energy. Sometimes there are other costs, cost for your website, cost for the services that you use to get your message out. Um, and it's important to maintain these also. And of course, there's always going to be change. There are always going to be developments. And sometimes you'll look at something that you're doing and say, well, that hasn't been as successful as we wanted. Let's try another way. And that's all perfectly reasonable. But you do try another way. You keep going. Um, you can never come to a successful conclusion to a journey if you stop your journey in the middle. And this is something that people so often do. And now, I've talked about before, one of the better things that I learned from Ed the Pagan is that it's not a book until the last page is finished. Um, you're not accomplishing anything if you don't, in fact, accomplish it. If you want to be a writer, you have to finish the writing and bring it out. You become a writer when someone else has read what you wrote. You become an artist when someone else is looking at your work. And I've known a lot of people who never get to that point because they want everything to be perfect, to be exactly a certain way. And this will kill their projects because they'll never get it to the point they think is perfect. Perfection is not your friend, perfection is your enemy in that sense. Now, we talked about different understandings of perfection last week. In this case, I'm using it more in the standard definition. But yeah, it's far more important to progress than to perfect. And in fact, the act of progressing in many ways will perfect your artistry, will perfect your work, will perfect your outcome, because you'll learn as you go. But if you never complete it, you'll never learn. Um, you'll never see it from anyone's view but your own. And this is not really constructive to doing important things. So, in addition to persistence, you've actually got to apply the things you're doing. You've got to get them out in the world. If you don't, they're merely theories, they're merely ideas, and they will die with you. And, is that good or bad? Well, in the history of the world, the vast majority of plans and projects never got outside of the mind of the person who was thinking about them. So, obviously, that's perfectly fine. It happens. But if you really want to make an effect in the world, you actually have to do it. And you have to be persistent with it. And you have to keep going. And, when it doesn't work out perfectly the first time, you got to do it again. When you get tired, you have to keep doing it. When there is opposition towards it, of course, you should ask yourself, is the opposition warranted? Is the opposition really jealousy? Is the opposition someone else guarding their own empire? Sometimes you'll find they might be right, in which case you change what you're doing and then you do it. More often, in my experience, you'll find that the opposition is coming from one of these other sources, in which case you just keep doing what you're doing. And the more you persist at what you do, the more successful in the end you're going to be alongside keeping it relevant. If what you're doing becomes irrelevant, well, then it's obviously not going to be particularly successful. Nobody needs something that's irrelevant. Um, I've talked a lot about um, people describing themselves as elders who also complain that no one listens to them or wants to hear what they have to say. And one of the reasons for this is they haven't kept themselves relevant. They're wanting to speak as if it were 1968 or 1988, and it's not. Things have changed greatly, and you have to be mindful of that. You have to stay relevant to the people you're talking to now. Um, one of the things I often see posted on social media is the meme that you could cripple an entire generation by giving them a rotary phone and instructions to use it written in cursive. Um, and that's true, except there is no circumstance in which that would ever happen. And hello to Zane in the chat room. And so it's also an irrelevancy. If that's the mindset you're coming from, of course no one's going to listen to you. Why would they listen to such garbage? Because it is. Yes, it might be true. Young people would not probably know how to work a rotary phone. And the older people saying that probably don't remember how to crank up their cars because that was their parents' generation. And they probably wouldn't know how to properly care for their horses or hitch them up to the buggy from their parents' generation. And it does not matter because we no longer do it. Yes, it's nice to know that for certain circumstances. If you're a historical reenactor, if you love trivia, that's great. I remember many years ago reading one of the Little House on the Prairie books. I couldn't tell you why, but I did. And I was fascinated by the description of the mother using the wood fire stove. And it gave a pretty good description of how she did that. And it never occurred to me that you would need to cook that way with a wood fire stove because I had never seen one. Um, and it was, to me, an interesting thing. But is it relevant? Well, if I were a camper, maybe. People certainly do cook still over open fires, but it's not quite the same as a wood fire stove, but there's some similarity. But I'm not one of them, and it has literally no relevance in my life. Um, Interesting to hear about, not something that I would be well advised to put a lot of effort into. Um, we have to remember this when we are wanting to talk to people, that we need to be able to reach them. We need to be able to give them a reason to want to listen to us. I was listening to someone the other day talking about um, things they saw as being wrong with Christian ministers' sermons. And I believe it was a Christian minister doing this, and it was on Instagram somewhere. But he started with the idea that so often they started with a bad joke. And the speaker felt this was off putting. And I have no idea. Um, I can't say I've never heard a Christian sermon, but I've heard very few of them. And I couldn't begin to tell you. The last one I heard, it would have been at some sort of third party event. Um, but I can see how it would be off putting if it was done badly. And you need to look at how you communicate. Are you communicating well? Are you doing well in reaching your audience? And, I asked myself this question, and the answer is, well, yes, sort of. I look at the names that show up in my chat room, and I feel like I'm doing a relatively good job because I see the same names come back day after day, and I see new names come in on a regular basis. Um, but, I would also say I could be doing a better job, and hopefully I will. Um, Now, Zane asks, are you eager to see new futuristic technology? Possibly we won't need to cook anymore. Robots and AI will take care of it. And the answer is, well, yes, I am actually. I love my microwave, and I I do every now and then cook on a stove, but not very often. And I enjoy that futuristic technology. I can think of futuristic technologies that are more recent that I've enjoyed, like air fryers. And yes, I think these are good things. I am eager to see them across the board. And one of the things that I thought that I would mention during this program is that on the subject of persistence, I intend to continue speaking on video throughout my lifetime and up until the time of my death. I also plan to continue speaking on video after my death, and that is very much an active plan of mine. And there are, of course, a couple of different ways for that to happen. One is the videos I've done are still going to be there as long as people take care of them and keep them accessible. And so you can consult, if you're interested, what I had to say about any given subject, as long as those videos remain viable. But new technology is allowing, for want of a better way to put it, an electronic Reverend Don to exist and to continue speaking on these subjects long after the biological Reverend Don is gone. And I am very much committed to developing that technology. And we've already been experimenting with it. And it will be a very interesting development, I think. And I think many interesting things can be done from it. I am not one of those people who is afraid of new technologies. I see it all over the place. And I'm not afraid of it for two reasons. One, you can't stop it. Once the genie is out of the bottle, it does not generally go back in. And two, it's what you do with it. And I've heard people be very upset about AI artwork, and I'm not one of them. I think I've remarked that one of the things that I find very encouraging about AI artwork is now the little imperfections in my artwork are no longer imperfections. They're the demonstration. It was done by hand. The time the color went outside of the line, the time the line does not connect, the time that this or that is wrong, shows it was done by a human hand, because AI generally isn't going to do that. Um, and it has kind of changed how I look at that. But I'm not going to be afraid of it, because I know I can't stop it. I have to find out, how do I live with it? How do I use this? How do I benefit from it? Because there is no not having it. And I see people saying, "Don't sign this petition." Petitions are worthless for the most part, particularly here. Nothing you do is going to stop AI. So instead, I think you should be looking at how it can be beneficial to you, not focus only on how you think it will be negative for you. And I have seen often the meme that says, we've kind of gone the wrong direction. I wanted robotics and AI to do my housework and my dishes so that I could do my artwork, and instead the AI is doing the artwork, and I'm still doing the housework and the dishes. Um, but nonetheless, these things are happening whether we like it or not, and the next generation isn't going to remember the things that we objected to. Um, I'm sure, and I know, in fact, quite literally, that when manufacturing of furniture first became a thing, the people who had formerly been hand making all the furniture were terribly upset. And many people who were accustomed to handmade furniture didn't really like this change. However, the benefit of the change far exceeded whatever objections there were, and it happened. Um, if you look at the development of automobiles, or public transit, or anything in modern transportation, the people who were accustomed to the older form of transportations did not necessarily like it when it came out, until they saw how much easier it made things. And so, um, with new technology, we must adapt to it, because it's coming whether we adapt to it or not. And if we wish to remain relevant and we wish to remain persistent, we must adapt to it. It's just that simple. With that, I see that we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to thank you for joining me. If you'd like to support my work, you can do so through my Patreon, which you can find at revdonlewis.com, and also through the many offerings we have at CorellianPublishing.com. Tomorrow, my guest will be Chris Copeland, and we'll be talking about new things at CorellianPublishing.com. I hope you'll join me then. And until next time, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for everything that you do for us in our lives, for your presence in our lives now and always. We know that you're always with us, but from respect, we thank you for that presence. And may you be